I guess there are two parts, I suppose, to that, to answering that question that I would highlight. I mean, and the first of those is simply that it's essentially the likes of Blackstone and Macquarie and Brookfield can and do buy up housing, mobile home communities, wind farms, toll roads, parking meter systems, because they can. And obviously they can, as you hinted, because the state says they can. So there's nothing, in theory at least, to stop government saying, no, we don't think this is an appropriate investment space for asset managers. We are going to stop them buying things. Of course, governments could do that if they chose to do so. We can maybe come back later to why they don't do so, but they could. So yes, in general, the state plays a role. In fact, there are going to be three parts to the answer rather than two. I just realised that. Sorry about it. Second part of the answer is that and many people listening might already have figured this out for themselves, but they've played a more direct role in many ways, because obviously a lot of these assets were actually conventionally owned by the state, whether in the form of central government or, for example, municipal government actors. So for example, in Germany, to take that as an example, a lot of the major housing portfolios that traditionally were owned by municipalities, both in the former West Germany and in the former East Germany, in the 1990s and 2000s, were sold off precisely to asset management companies like Blackstone, like Fortress, like Cerberus, and various others. So the government played a very, very direct role there. And again, look at the UK. Asset managers like Macquarie have become major owners of the water and wastewater networks in the UK in recent times. Well, they could only buy those things because the government decided to privatize those assets in the first place back at the end of the 1980s. So that's the second government role, is not just enabling them to buy them, but actually selling them. These were things that were publicly owned, but that are now, in many cases, publicly owned, that are now privately owned. And then the third role, which again, some listeners might be aware of, is another important one, which is that a lot of these assets that asset managers have bought, asset managers, when buying them, have considered those to be relatively risky purchases. They've thought, we would like to buy these. We would like to buy, for example, this line on a subway system. But we're worried that over the next 10 years, the number of passengers using this subway system might decline, and therefore we don't want to buy this subway system because of that. So what governments have often done in those circumstances to encourage asset managers to invest is they said, okay, we will come in and we will essentially remove and shoulder some of the risk that you don't want to take on. So in the case of a subway line, for example, they'll come in and say, okay, if passenger numbers fall and revenues fall below a certain level, we will guarantee a certain level of income to you, the investor, as a way to encourage you to make that investment.
So what Daniela Gabor calls the de-risking state.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's not her term. That term's existed for a long time, but she's sort of popularized it. That's exactly right. So governments come in. I mean, the term has been used for a long time by governments and private sector investors. Precisely, that's right. The government will come in and remove that risk to encourage the investment to take place. And my view on all of that is that in some cases, what they're doing is necessary, by which I mean necessary to precipitate the investment. So private sector investors would not invest unless the government shouldered some of that risk. I think in other cases, it's less clear that that's the case. I think in some cases, the private sector would probably invest anyway, but the government just comes along and sweetens the deal. So yes, the government plays a central role in all of this for precisely those three sets of reasons that I mentioned.